Where is the police? If there's anyone here, make yourself known!
Officers with taser.
The safest place anyone should be is in their own home.
This is the Scarcity Studios YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. On the 21st of August 2022, James Witham arrived at the home of Ashley Dale. He forced the door open by kicking it and ran in there with a Skorpion submachine gun. He fired 10 bullets in her direction. One of them hit her abdomen as she ran for the back door. Ashley Dale, 28 years old, sadly would die from her injuries, and James Witham then went upstairs into the other bedroom and fired 8 shots into the wall. His intended target that day was the boyfriend of Ashley Dale, called Lee Harrison, but Lee Harrison was out at this time with friends, and Ashley was the innocent victim that was caught in the crossfire of a feud that had been ongoing for several years. It had all started when one of the men that had been convicted of the murder, Niall Barry, had drugs stolen from him by a gang from an area called Hillside. It was revealed in court that Lee Harrison had sided with the people who had stolen the drugs, and ever since, him and Niall Barry had had a rivalry, and also Niall held a vendetta. This would be reignited when they met at Glastonbury Festival in 2022, and Niall decided from that point that he was going to get somebody to try to kill Lee Harrison. And this week at Liverpool Crown Court, 4 men have been convicted of the murder of Ashley Dale: Joseph Piers, James Witham, Niall Barry and Sean Zeisz. Body cam footage also shows the moment that James Witham was arrested by the police while he was on the run.
For a suspicion of murder, alright. You don't have to say anything. The Miami defence, you don't mention one question, which will let on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Alright.
We'll put you in handcuffs. What's your name, fella? Joseph. Arrest on suspicion of murder, okay.
The court would later hear that James Piers was a foot soldier and he drove the Hyundai to the scene and earlier helped Witham to stab tyres in Miss Dale's car as an attempt to lure the couple outside of the house. Barry and Zeisz were convicted for murder for helping to arrange the killing and also for the feud that involved her boyfriend Lee Harrison. The trial heard from voice notes from Ashley Dale to her friends that discussed the fact that her boyfriend was at risk of being killed by the group and that this had started over a drug deal that had gone wrong. Ashley's family said that she fell in love with the wrong boy and they expressed their anger towards her boyfriend and also the murderers, but said that he never made any effort to try to support us following this and he's never admitted that he was the target. The trial was going on for 7 weeks and James Witham admitted manslaughter, but the Crown prosecution refused to accept this and he later was convicted of murder. He's from the Huyton area and he would also go on to admit that he was the gunman that fired the fatal shot. The senior investigating officer, Detective Chief Inspector Kath Cummins, says the actions of James Witham on that day had a devastating and widespread effect. Ashley was an innocent woman. She lost her life in the most brutal way at the hands of Witham, and this was compounded by the fact that she was murdered alone inside her own home. She should have felt safe there, but she was fatally shot. Her family have to live with this knowledge every single day. She went on to say that this was a complex and challenging investigation and it was only thanks to the painstaking work of the investigation team and also the community that rallied round and pointed them in the right direction in the very early stages of the investigation. The evidential material had a significance from cell site analysis to DNA and trawling through CCTV. The police gathered thousands of exhibits of evidence and 300 of them were digital devices. And the most important, they said, was Ashley's phone and the voice notes that she'd sent to friends describing what was going on in her life and leading up to the death. The 4 men, they said, have shown no remorse for any of their actions that led to Ashley's death, and instead they pled not guilty, which forced her family to go to court and have to relive Ashley's last moments over and over again. Ashley's family were commended for their composure during the trial by the police, and the 4 men will face the rest of their lives behind bars. I have waited till today to be able to follow up with this update due to the fact that they wasn't sentenced until the 22nd, and the court has now released the details of how long they have been jailed for. All 4 men were found guilty of conspiracy to murder Ashley's boyfriend Lee Harrison and conspiracy to possess a prohibited weapon, which was a Skorpion submachine gun, and also the ammunition with intent to endanger life. Sean Zeisz, 28 years old, from Huyton, was jailed for a minimum of 42 years for the murder of Ashley Dale, and also the conspiracy to murder Lee Harrison. Niall Barry, 26 years old, from Tubuck, was sentenced to life with a minimum of 47 years for the murder of Ashley Dale and conspiracy to murder Lee Harrison, as well as possession of the murder weapon. Joseph Piers, 29 years old, from Roby, was sentenced to life with a minimum of 41 years for the murder of Ashley and conspiracy to murder Lee Harrison. James Witham, the gunman, 41 years old, from Huyton, was sentenced to a minimum of 43 years for the murder of Ashley Dale and the conspiracy to murder Lee Harrison. The investigating officer, Kath Cummins, says, "Today Joseph Piers, James Witham, Neil Barry and Sean Zeisz have been jailed for life for the brutal and senseless murder of Ashley Dale in her own home on Sunday the 21st of August 2022. On that night, Ashley should have been safe in her home, but we've heard of this long-standing feud throughout the court trial that reignited by the meeting at Glastonbury and was also accelerated by the death of Ricky Warnick." She went on to say the group came together to seek revenge for long-standing drug disputes, and the prosecution found that this was the motive. And James Witham stormed into the home on that night wearing a balaclava and firing a Skorpion machine gun, and he murdered Ashley. She was ambitious, bubbly, charismatic and a young woman, and the community was rocked by her death. The judge in the case says, "I commend the officers that helped in this case and this trial and also supported the family. I know that there was a lot of work involved and this was a very difficult case." So these sentences today definitely reflect the outrage from the local community and also nationwide as well, when this story did make some of the bigger papers. And it shows the reality of the impact that this has on a family at the same time. Ashley was innocent of any involvement in any of this, and she was just basically caught in the crossfire. So I want to send my condolences to her family and friends, and thank you to everybody that has followed this story since last year when we first covered it, up until this point. And I'll be back again very shortly with some more news. Peace.
At 11:40 p.m. on the 20th of August last year, a Hyundai car drove into Leinster Road in Old Swan, Liverpool. Inside were two men, James Witham and Joseph Piers. They drove there as a result of a criminal agreement with Niall Barry and Sean Zeisz to kill the occupants of 40 Leinster Road using a Skorpion submachine gun. They each knew that Lee Harrison lived there with his partner, Ashley Dale. It was their home. The car had been acquired in the days leading up to what happened, with false number plates ready to use when the hiding of the car followed. In an attempt to bring the occupants out of the house, Witham and Piers stabbed the car tyres of the car parked outside. That set off the car alarm. Inside the house was Ashley Dale in her pyjamas, watching television. When she heard the alarm, she believed it was caused by heavy rain, and so she stayed inside. Outside, Witham and Piers waited for their moment for this planned killing. What followed was a murder of such seriousness that it has shocked both the local community and many in this country. The use of a military-grade submachine gun to kill a young woman in her own home at night in a planned shooting of the occupants of that house is beyond any understanding. At just after midnight, Witham got out of the Hyundai car, wearing a balaclava to hide his face. He carried that Skorpion submachine gun, loaded with 15 bullets. He broke through the locked front door, walked into the dining room. Ashley was in that room alone, moving towards the kitchen back door to escape, and there were lights on so that she was visible. Witham wickedly fired 10 bullets towards her as she was vulnerable and defenceless. One of those bullets passed through her abdomen and killed her. Her screams were heard by neighbours. Leaving her to die, Witham went upstairs looking for Lee Harrison. In a bedroom, he fired a further 5 bullets into the wall as a clear statement that if he had been in the house, he would have been killed also. After the shooting, Witham and Piers drove away. The car was parked elsewhere, out of view. and later that day to be hidden on the driveway of a property in St Helens. A week later it was driven by Piers and Zeisz to be hidden on another driveway in St Helens, until it was discovered by the police on the 9th of October. Ashley Dale died very shortly after she was shot. Lee Harrison has refused to cooperate in the police investigation into her murder. So involved with criminal drug-dealing gangs is he. For the family of Ashley Dale, this must have been a cruel twist to the tragic loss of their daughter and sister. Not only was she brutally killed in her own home, but Lee Harrison has refused to assist the police to bring her killers to justice. Yet despite this, Ashley's family has shown remarkable dignity as they've listened to the evidence in this trial. This court has heard the most moving victim personal statements of Ashley's mother, father, and grandmother. The harm that has been caused to them and their family is profound and will last forever. Ashley Dale was in the prime of her life, and she was gunned down in her own home where she should have been safe. This murder and the criminal conspiracies to murder and to possess the prohibited firearm and ammunition were planned by the four of you. The motive concerned a deep-seated drugs feud between Barry and Lee Harrison, who was also associated with a drugs criminal group called the Hillsiders, dealing in kilo quantities of Class A and B drugs and with access to guns. Barry also had access to guns, particularly military-grade Skorpion submachine guns. Witham, Zeisz and Piers were part of the gang with Barry and in violent competition with the Hillsiders, one of whom discharged a firearm in public and threatened Zeisz. I'm sure on the evidence that Barry and Witham played the lead roles in this murder, which was discussed and carried out from Barry's flat at 267 Pilch Lane in Huyton, Barry directing and providing the gun and ammunition, whilst Witham agreed to carry out the shooting, with Piers assisting Witham driving in the car to the scene. They travelled in that car jointly, puncturing the car tyres to activate the car alarm, and remained together as they returned to the flat in Pilch Lane. It was there that Barry and Zeisz waited, anxiously calling Witham and Piers to hear how they were progressing in the planned killing. In the days that followed, Barry planned to leave the country, but was arrested before he could do so. Witham and Piers stayed in a hotel in St Helens, away from their homes in Liverpool, and also stayed in Scotland before they were arrested. Upon the arrest of Barry and Zeisz, evidence was also discovered of other offences by them, amounting to very serious organised crime. It was revealed in EncroChat conversations, in which both Barry and Zeisz were part of a conspiracy to supply large quantities of illicit drugs over a 6-month period in 2020 in both the north and south of this country. In Barry's case, over 40 kilograms of cocaine, half a kilogram of heroin, 28 kilograms of cannabis, 1 kilogram of ketamine, and a kilogram of amphetamine, represented in counts 1 to 5 of the second indictment. A cautious estimate of the value of those drugs is over £1.5 million. Count 7 of that indictment also concerned a conspiracy to possess prohibited weapons and ammunition, including a Skorpion submachine gun identical to the one used to murder Ashley Dale. Count 8 concerned a conspiracy to sell or transfer a prohibited weapon and ammunition. Those offences were also in 2020. Barry was convicted of them after a trial on the 8th of June this year. He must now be sentenced for those offences in addition to the offences with which this trial was concerned. Zeisz pleaded guilty to the conspiracy to supply drugs, being 14.5 kilograms of cocaine, 6 kilograms of heroin, 13 kilograms of cannabis and 2 kilograms of ketamine over the same 6 months period in 2020. A cautious estimate of the value of those drugs is over £680,000. I shall give him full credit for his guilty plea to those offences. The defendant's antecedents are as follows. Joseph Pears is aged 29 and has previous convictions for 11 offences, including driving offences, drugs possession and public order offences. Those convictions do not significantly aggravate the seriousness of these offences. Sean Zeisz is aged 28 and has previous convictions for 6 offences, including for possession of Class A and B drugs and handling stolen goods. In 2016, he was convicted of assault occasioning actual bodily harm and common assault. The victim was his girlfriend at the time. Whilst noteworthy, those convictions do not, in my judgment, significantly aggravate the seriousness of these offences. Niall Barry is aged 26 and has 4 previous convictions, in addition to those he was convicted of after trial in June this year. They were for drugs possession in relation to cocaine and cannabis. Of themselves, they do not significantly affect the seriousness of these offences. And James Witham is aged 41, the oldest of the defendants. He has 37 previous convictions, including for drugs possession, drug supply, dishonesty offences, and 1 for assault occasioning actual bodily harm in 2002. Of themselves, they also do not significantly aggravate the seriousness of these offences. There is little that can be said in mitigation of sentence for any of the defendants. In sentencing the defendants and assessing their culpability for counts 1 to 3, murder, conspiracy to murder, and conspiracy to possess a prohibited weapon and ammunition with intent to endanger life, I am satisfied that Witham and Barry must be treated as equally the most culpable. Witham carried out the shooting, and it was Barry who provided the gun with the ammunition and was the protagonist in the planning. He had the greatest motive and had threatened violence to Lee Harrison previously. Pears assisted Witham in the shooting, and Zeisz actively and intentionally encouraged the shooting. The sentence for the murder of Ashley Dale, count 1, must be imprisonment for life for each of you. I am required to fix the minimum term that must be served in custody before any of you may seek a release on licence, which will be decided on whether you remain a danger to the public, as I find that you currently do. The starting point for the determination of that minimum term must be 30 years, because this was a murder with a firearm. That term must be adjusted upwards substantially to reflect the aggravating factors of seriousness and your overall offending. I have concluded that those aggravating factors include, firstly, that this was murder involving a significant degree of planning. Secondly, that you are each to be sentenced for the conspiracy to murder Lee Harrison. Thirdly, that Ashley was murdered in her own home. Fourthly, the highly dangerous firearm used in the murder, a submachine gun which was used to discharge 15 bullets in the home of Ashley Dale and Lee Harrison. Fifthly, the efforts to dispose of evidence, including hiding the Hyundai car used in the shooting and the firearm, which has never been recovered. Sixthly, these offences were carried out against the background of violent drugs gang rivalry. In addition, in the cases of Zeisz and Barry, you must be sentenced for the separate offending on the second indictment, for which Barry was convicted earlier this year and Zeisz pleaded guilty. I must make it clear that sentencing you all is not a mathematical exercise of adding up all the sentences to arrive at a final sentence. I shall impose imprisonment for life with a single minimum term on count 1, murder, which will reflect all of the defendants' offending. I shall impose concurrent sentences for counts 2 and 3, and also for the second indictment, which concerns Zeisz and Barry only. On count 2, conspiracy to murder Lee Harrison, I am satisfied that a concurrent sentence of imprisonment for life under section 285 of the Sentencing Act 2020 is necessary for each of you. The conspiracy to murder is a Schedule 19 offence under the Act. Each of you is over 21, and I have concluded that the circumstances of this offence and the murder mean that each of you is a dangerous offender. Whilst there is no sentence guideline for conspiracy to murder, the attempted murder guideline is most appropriate because this conspiracy, whilst in action, involved driving to the victim's home, breaking in and shooting Ashley Dale. Had Lee Harrison been at home, I am sure that he would also have been murdered. As an attempted murder, count 2 involved very high culpability with the use of a prohibited firearm and category 3 harm. That provides a starting point of 25 years imprisonment with a sentence range of 20 to 30 years. Many of the aggravating factors for count 1 apply to count 2 and necessitate an increase in the sentence to 27 years. I find no significant mitigating factors. Accordingly, the notional sentence on count 2 is 27 years, which I discount to 18 years as the minimum term. Therefore, the sentence on count 2 will be a concurrent sentence of imprisonment for life with a minimum term of custody of 18 years. Count 3, conspiracy to possess a prohibited firearm and ammunition with intent to endanger life. I impose a concurrent sentence of 14 years imprisonment on each of you. That sentence is one of high culpability under the firearms guideline and in category 2 with a high risk of severe harm. On the second indictment against Zeisz and Barry, I impose concurrent sentences with the count 1 murder sentence. For the drugs offences, count 1 to 5, the culpability and harm categories are mostly agreed between the prosecution and defence. I accept that Barry's offending in count 2 was category 2 harm and not category 1, being half a kilogram. Also, Zeisz is entitled to 1/3 discount for his early guilty plea. Therefore, on count 1, possession with intent to supply cocaine, 15 years imprisonment for Barry, 8 years for Zeisz after his guilty plea. On count 2, possession with intent to supply heroin, 10 years for Barry and 10 years for Zeisz after his guilty plea. On count 3, possession with intent to supply cannabis, 4 years imprisonment for Barry and 4 years imprisonment to Zeisz after his guilty plea. On count 4, possession with intent to supply amphetamine, 4 years imprisonment for Barry. On count 5, possession with intent to supply ketamine, 4 years imprisonment for Barry and 4 years imprisonment for Zeisz after his guilty plea. On counts 7 and 8 of the second indictment, the firearms offences for which Barry was also convicted, I impose consecutive sentences to the drugs offences, but they will all be served concurrently with the murder sentence. On count 7, possession of a prohibited weapon, a sentence of 8 years. This was a culpability A with a type 1 firearm and category 1 harm. On count 8, conspiracy to sell or transfer a prohibited weapon, a sentence of 15 years concurrently with count 7, but consecutively with the drug sentences. The total sentence on the second indictment is therefore 10 years imprisonment for Zeisz and 30 years imprisonment for Barry. As I have already stated, those sentences will be served concurrently with the sentence on count 1 murder. I return now to the minimum term to be served as part of the sentence of imprisonment for life for the murder of Ashley Dale. I must adjust the 30-year starting point to reflect the aggravating and any mitigating factors. Also, I adjust that term to take into account the different roles played by each of you. Finally, I've made a significant downward adjustment of the term to reflect the principle of totality of sentencing. Stand up. I sentence each of you to imprisonment for life on count 1 for the murder of Ashley Dale. Niall Barry, on count 1, murder, your minimum term is increased to 35 years, but must be further increased to reflect your offending in counts 2, 3, and in the second indictment. Your minimum term is 47 years, less 433 days served on remand. James Witham, on count 1, murder, your minimum term is also increased to 35 years, but must be further increased to reflect your offending on counts 2 and 3. Your minimum term is 43 years, less 295 days served on remand. Joseph Pearce, on count 1, murder. Your minimum term is increased to 33 years, but must be further increased to reflect your offending in counts 2 and 3. Your minimum term is 41 years, less 295 days served on remand. Sean Zeisz, on count 1, murder. Your minimum term is increased to 32 years, but must be further increased to reflect your offending in counts 2 and 3 and the second indictment. Your minimum term is 42 years, less 448 days served on remand. On count 2, conspiracy to murder, I impose a concurrent sentence of imprisonment for life on each of you, with a minimum term of 18 years custody. On count 3, conspiracy to possess a prohibited firearm and ammunition with intent to endanger life, I impose a concurrent sentence of 14 years imprisonment on each of you. The sentences on the second indictment of 30 years imprisonment for you, Barry, and 10 years for you, Zeisz, will also be served concurrently. You will each be required to pay the statutory charge, but in your cases, Zeisz and Barry, I postpone the making of the order until the conclusion of the confiscation proceedings under the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002.